and transition to the Academy Award winner for Best Picture, CODA. CODA is a story about a young high school student, high school senior, who lives with her family, which is entirely deaf, and she has been the sole provider of translation and communication for her family. The story itself, while very intriguing, is certainly not perfect, and I do have my thoughts on it. However, John absolutely enjoyed this show, and I would like to give him the spotlight to give us his thoughts first.
I absolutely loved this movie. I mean, it's not the first disabled people living with non-disabled people and the non-disabled people being the ones taken advantage of, or vice versa. It's by no means a very bizarre situation that exists in this world. But at the same time, I feel like this was a very well written story. I feel like the beats were hit exactly where they were supposed to be. I really did believe every person's emotion at every point of the film. And oh man, this movie made me want to cry, but it also made me want to burn the world down. And that to me is what I ask for when I watch a movie for especially like something that doesn't have a series or a big backstory following it. Like if I'm gonna just walk into a movie that I don't know anything about, I want to have some emotional tie to it. And this movie just played with my emotions the whole time. And while it ended very Pixar, very Disney-esque, it still felt like the best possible way to end the last 5 minutes of the movie. Because just from where I've been, what I've seen, the people I've met, and even the community that is the deaf community, like what I've learned about them, it this movie did them all of the justice. And I felt like it just it mattered. It deserved to be, the story deserved to be told, and it was told in a very eloquent, very relatable, emotionally controlling, but also emotionally growing film. And it was just awesome. I loved this movie.
Yeah, I thought that the movie itself was overall. I will give it praise. I will start with what I liked about it, what I thought worked well. The acting, first and foremost, was on point in so many ways that it was. Yeah, I don't have any complaints about how they acted. The emotions were clearly there, even though they're doing sign language and they're not really speaking. And there's a whole the whole that whole portion of the story with her and her family, I thought was really well done, and I thought the interactions between everybody involved with that was good. Um, Overall, is this movie worth watching? Yes. I'm not going to say that it's not worth watching. I think that because John and I do have differing opinions on this movie, that basically speaks for itself right there. You're going to make of it what you will. My wife and I do not feel this was Best Picture worthy at all. Um, while it's definitely good and it's definitely worthwhile and probably worth the nomination, I felt that Macbeth was a far better product overall. Macbeth, in my opinion, is flawless and was not only deserving of the Best Picture nomination, I think it should have beat this movie out. This movie basically ticks all the boxes for your Oscar bait film. It's, struggling family with a disability, and they're having trouble getting by because their fishing business isn't as profitable as it used to be, because as the fishing business has grown, the unions are getting tighter and costs are getting more expensive, and so there's that aspect. And then I think what really soured the movie for me was the kind of very awkward and seemingly forced teenage romance that I think you could have just cut out of the movie completely, or had just kind of more in the backdrop in the long run, because it just felt so. It's like I, I'm not a teenager, So that part does not appeal to me at all. And it might appeal to other teenagers. And so maybe this really does work as a family movie. You know, if you have young kids growing up, I think it's fine for that. I mean, there's certainly some. Actually, I think all the dirty words were just signed words. I don't think anybody actually said a single swear in this film, if I'm remembering correctly. And so it's not. It's definitely something that you can watch with grandma, and I think that's probably why it wins in the end. Is Macbeth is definitely more mature. There's not really something that you want to watch at a family reunion, whereas this movie, you know, you put on, it's very wholesome, feel good. Of course, the teenage romance isn't my biggest issue. My biggest problem and the most jarring plot hole in this entire movie that was either overlooked or I don't know how you got past this one was the treatment of the family members because they're deaf. We have so much technology that talking with deaf people and treating them regularly like normal ass Americans, or just people in general, excuse me, is not really that hard to do. That's probably the biggest thing I had, and they did that to try and contrive some drama into the movie and to make it feel like, oh, you know, these guys, they're just, nobody likes them and nobody gets along because they're deaf. And it's like, if I came across a deaf person, the first thing I'm doing is pulling out my phone and going speech to text. Like, I'll just say everything and they can read it on a screen. We literally, pretty much every single, like, we have a specific council in the United States that makes sure that if you are deaf, you will get the assisted resources you need to communicate and function with the rest of society. And so the fact that they tried to, if they had set this movie in like the 60s or 70s or something, that probably would have played better as far as whether or not they had a struggle to communicate and get along with their community. It's 2022, people. Or this movie takes place in 2021. Everyone has smartphones. Everyone has the capability of communicating in different forms and different mediums. I mean, you can't tell me that these people don't know how to use that technology, okay? They've been around long enough that they know how to communicate and function with their disability. And so I'm not trying to downplay the fact that, oh, you know, they did something wrong. It's the fact that was such an oversight just to contrive more drama. And that's really what I did not like about the film overall.
Completely disagree.
Okay, you're allowed to disagree and be wrong.
But I the reason I disagree is because I took an ASL class in 2019. I learned quite a bit about the deaf community and quite a bit about the struggle that it is to be deaf. But in terms of this movie and in terms of the family, I remember growing up in a small Christian family in a world that was leaning more and more towards anti-Christian in the most like non-confrontational sense. Just like, oh, if you don't believe in evolution, you're an idiot. If you believe in the young earth, you're an idiot. And I think this movie, like, especially when it comes to the daughter and her experience, where she talks about when she joined school, she talked funny because the only time she could talk was, you know, trying to mimic her parents who could not talk because they couldn't hear the sound of their own voice. And I don't know if you've ever heard a deaf person try to talk, but it is painful. Not even being rude. It's just that is their, and they even say it themselves. But when it comes to a family that is mostly deaf, and the youngest member of that family is the talking one, they've already adapted to the world. And we watch in this movie as they, like, the daughter straight up says, Mom, if you stopped calling them bad names, maybe you would give them a chance to actually, like, get to know you, and you would take the time to get to know them. In the case of the technology thing, we watch the brother have a text in-person conversation with a non-deaf person, literally iPhone, like they just are texting each other from across the bar, the 2 feet across from each other. So all the things you're saying that they didn't do, the thing that I see more than anything is that, like, we're watching it from the deaf family's perspective. And just like growing up in the Christian family, I can name all the times that I felt anti-Christian rhetoric from people around me that, like, I would never call a bully, especially not by today's standards. but it did influence me greatly. It made me more defiant. It made me want to believe harder and prove them wrong harder. And I just got more indignant that they were wrong and I was right. And I think that's the same thing we're watching is this family is like, no, we're deaf. We're disabled. You come to us, not us come to you. And they're both wrong. Like, both parties need to be empathetic to the situation, the context of the situation. And I think this movie took so much time to show you the separate context where the school children are just saying what they heard. They're making fun of deaf people in general, and she's not even friends with them. She's not technically around them, but they saw her. They go, I remember I heard a story. Let me make fun of deaf people. Oh, I got a laugh from my lunch table. I've seen it a million times. I've been the butt of a million jokes.
Yeah, so I see where you're coming from, and the points you're touching on are not the points that I had a problem with. I agree with what you're saying. Yes, she was made fun of because she talked like a deaf person, and she was, yes, they make their jokes. Those aren't the issues that I have. I'm aware that high school kids are still high school kids, and so that's not the issue I have. What I have an issue with is what you're implying, the fact that they created the dependency on her because she could hear, is that it only works if they, lived in a cave until 2021.
What? Paying a low-level worker is outrageously expensive in America.
All right, Curione has an outsider perspective looking in, since unfortunately he will get to the movie later. Probably tweet his thoughts.
Yeah, so just to provide a little bit of perspective, any differences from people, or at least from the norm, has a tendency to encourage that group to become insular. Okay? We've seen this countless times. Okay? A really good example would be something like the Jewish community. The Jewish community has a tendency to be insular, and the reason why they have a tendency to be insular is because they have very legitimate reasons for being afraid of outsiders. The problem is their almost internalized xenophobia causes more xenophobia. Similar things happen in the deaf community overall. I have several friends that sign. I'm very good friends with a couple of people that work in the translation community for deaf people. And you do see that it becomes a very insular community, and they tend to shut out the hearing world because, I guess the best way to put it is, when you're rejected by society, it just pushes you into your group a lot more, which I believe is a little bit of John's point here too. So I understand where both of you are coming from, and it's a very different perspective. But I feel like at the end of the day, while we as not members of that community can make that, well, if they just kind of opened up and were with us more and willing to adapt, things would be better. At the same time, their life experience may point them in the opposite direction. So I think there's a little bit of mindfulness that I think we all have to have, as everybody's experiences clouds their current being. So if they've had very negative experiences with the hearing world, maybe they don't really want to be a part of the hearing world. And that's why we're seeing the reluctance to embrace adaptive technology.
And that's a very good point overall, Curione. And I can see where I think it's because of the perspective and interactions that I've had and I've seen mostly from what, I don't necessarily have any deaf friends myself, except for John growing up, but that's neither here nor there. What I do know is that it's from my perspective. It's putting I try to see what I would do in those situations in the movie. And I think the biggest complaint that I have is the choir teacher's response to the whole situation. The guy is a straight up douchebag about it. And again, any teacher in the current era is not going to hold it against a prospective college student because she's trying to help her disabled. That was probably the part that really pissed me off the most. Now I see what you're saying, Corione. I think you make a valid point, and yes, John, you do make a valid perspective in that they would probably self-isolate because they don't. It does create a barrier. It's just for me in that situation. If I have worked with a couple of people who were deaf before, and I mean, we communicated just fine. I didn't treat them any differently. We communicated via text, and there was no issue. And so I guess it was the way that they tried to portray that isolationism. It just didn't quite come across the way that I think it should have to really get the point across. And then maybe I just missed it, maybe out of my own ignorance, my own arrogance, which is entirely possible. It just, a lot of the drama just felt played up and contrived is what I'm really getting at. And like I said, the biggest offense to me was the choir teacher who was like, oh, you blew me off again. And it's like, dude, her whole family's deaf and she's the reason that's it. Just shut up. Go away. Go off screen. Go rewrite your character and try to come back with making more sense. That's all I have to say to him. Otherwise, he was a good character, well acted. It was just so...
I thought his arrogance was so awesome. Especially in...
Yeah, it went too far. It was too convoluted.
No.
That is a point I will not concede, is the choir teacher being a douche.
No, I think that was the best example of it because... Especially from her perspective, what did she tell the teacher? Oh, I'm sorry, I have to deal with family stuff. And so what does the teacher say? Family's more important than my class that I'm trying to give you free lessons for. What she should have said was, I am an underage worker working a job that literally prevents my family from going to jail or losing their livelihood, to which then, yes, maybe... the actor, the character of the teacher would have had a different opinion. But I think that, like, his arrogance versus her inability to translate her situation, like, even though she's been the translator for her family forever, she's more literal translation. She even chooses when to not say certain things. And I think that is really the big thing, is she's more about being reserved, not being seen as weak, not being seen as tired, not being seen as overextended, so much so to the point that her teacher just assumes that she's being a bad teenager or a typical teenager and not an actually, like, contributing member of society who's being forced to do more work than any teenager should ever be forced to do.
Yeah,
and that's... Most translators are paid thousands of dollars an hour.
See, but we're not given a proper resolution to that. Because I guess you could say that when he comes back and he helps her with the audition, that's kind of like his way of recognizing, oh, I made a mistake. There's just no... They don't confront the issue. They don't confront the fact that he was being extremely arrogant and extremely rude about it. And I think that's really
do we in real life?
Huh?
How often do teachers ever get put in their place and actually change? How often do people get called arrogant and actually become less arrogant? I think this movie really showed the human of both of them. She was unable to express her actual situation, and therefore her teacher felt like he was just dealing with a complaining child rather than dealing with a hyper-matured child. And that, I think that was like the only thing that really frustrated me with the resolution of the movie, is it really seemed like their lives went fine after she left. Like, I would have much rather just seen her audition, roll credits, and we're done. Like, we don't know if they get better. We don't know if they learn their lessons, because in real life, 9 times out of 10, nobody learns from the mistakes they just made.
Yeah,
or even knows they made mistakes.
There was no way she was not getting in, because if you can get a singer-performer that can sign while also singing, I mean, that's exactly... Like, there's definitely a job for that.
Free interpreter.
Forever.
Yep.
So there, I knew once her family came into the audition and she started signing for them, I was like, yeah, she got it. There's just come on. There's no way. Then I really would have hated this movie if she didn't get in for that. I would have been like, this movie's just stupid. But overall, like I said, it's good. It's worth checking out. I do recommend it. I may watch it again in the future. It's not bad. It's just I have certain things that I didn't like that I've articulated that I think could have either been, maybe they could have just gone a better way about showing that, because it feels like, I don't know, it feels like there was just some elements missing, some smaller elements that could have really turned this into a masterpiece, whereas Macbeth, like I said, to me is perfection. I don't think there's any getting better on that. I didn't see anything wrong with that movie, and that's where my comparison comes from as to why I don't think CODA deserved Best Picture, because it's not without its flaws, and it definitely could have worked some things better. But overall, is it good? Absolutely. It's definitely worthy of the nomination. This is not a bad movie. It's just, like I said, I think it got a little more praise because they played up on the concept, which I also do want to say too, they executed the concept very well. Again, I'll give it praise where it's due, because I was very blown away by the fact how seamless the signing and the translation and all of it was put together. And then it also culminates in some very, very beautiful scenes when the father asks her to sing, and while he's doing so, he starts to put his fingers on her throat so he can feel the vibrations. That part really almost got to me, and even just thinking about it. So it's not without its charm. Definitely a great family movie. I would absolutely recommend family movie night, 100%. Watch this film and decide for yourself. It's just, like I said, there's things that my experience in life that this movie tried to put forth that I'm just like, no. So, it is, even that's what we're here for, is to share our ideas and share what we got. So, John, any more thoughts regarding CODA?
Just one thing that we should mention, especially for Carrion who hasn't seen it yet. The whole situation takes place over one semester of high school. She went from never playing in the choir to then playing in the choir to then the choir teacher getting to know her, which I think is actually a major important piece. The choir teacher had no relationship with this girl, and she like from there the story begins. And I think that's actually an important piece to mention, because like if we had a time lapse of their whole life, I would probably lean more towards Parker. Like there are way more ways to adapt to a bad situation, but in like learning to adapt in 3 to 6 months is next to impossible. Especially if you've never adapted before. And I think that was something that was hard to tell that was going on in the movie. Like it kind of felt like we were watching a whole year of high school, but it turns out we were literally only watching the final semester of senior year.
Yeah, and I really think that putting as much effort and focus into the awkward teenage romance really just kind of soured it more.
It was awkward in teenage.
Huh?
I said it was awkward in teenage.
Right, and it was a little too
didn't disagree with that at any point.
Yeah, and that was like, I don't know, for me that was just like, okay, I want to move on to I get it, I did this before, don't need to remind myself again. Yes, okay, horrible memories flooding back, let's get to the next scene. So yeah, there might be more personal bias in what I didn't like about this movie overall, but it's like I said, there's certain things that I think could have done better, and we'll just have to see what Corione's follow-up thoughts are at a later time, because I definitely would like to hear Corione. And I'm not opposed to coming back to this movie maybe next week for like a little 15-20 minute Corione's rant or praise on this one. But I think we've said all we can say on this, and so with that, good night, everybody.